asset management fundamentally is a financially driven sector, and that's where it originates from. Yes, we look at it from an operational perspective in the built environment, but it's ultimately understanding the commercial side of things too, and then making sure that different objectives are all aligned and looking at it from a long term instead of just focusing on the here and the now. It's really about understanding your outcomes. What value do we want to extract from this asset? Let's look at it from a life cycle perspective and a whole life cycle perspective. Let's not look at just building the asset now. Let's look at the asset now and in 25 years. And in order to do that, and the best way to do that is to make sure that it's digitally enabled, make sure that you understand what the outcomes are that you want to get from it. A big drive of it is really commercial. There's still a way to go to really understand what outcomes are desired, and that is okay, because that's part of the journey. And what we're seeing now with our clients and with our work is they're going, right, Donavan, we've got a fantastic strategy, we've got a great implementation plan, we've got all of our policies and processes. How are we then going to measure the effectiveness of all of this in the long term? And that's what's yet to come. And that's, and it's not something that can be done on paper. It's not something that can be done in a week or a month. That's something that's going to be done over the long term. And if you stay consistent with everything that has been set out within your plan, you will then start realizing those benefits. There's been a really big push, especially in the last 10 years or 12 years that I've been in the region, which initially started off with really trying to push privatization. And having worked on some of those privatization projects a number of years ago, the ultimate objective was obviously to move away from government funding, privatize some of these critical infrastructures and these entities. Some of the challenges, and probably the biggest challenge that we faced, was really around data governance. Not necessarily the data itself, because you can capture data. It was the governance of how that data would then be used. And then moving on from that, and in more recent times, we've seen a really big push around PPPs, as you would know, within the region, and that's a really exciting time, because that's new infrastructure. Those are new assets that are coming online. So we can take some of the lessons learned around the privatization efforts that we had a number of years ago, and we can apply those to the way that we approach PPPs, in a sense that we know what governance we need to have in place. We understand what the data needs to look like, and then we need to be able to make sure that we have full alignment between everyone that's part of that SPV when it comes to the consortium, because we're going to have our contractors, we're going to have our financiers, we're going to have our operators, and everyone is heavily invested in the outcomes of and the success of those PPPs. So over the next 5 years, it's really going to be a big push to making sure that we have that alignment, that we don't have those silos, and that we have a really comprehensive and structured model in the way that we approach PPPs. And I think that's where, Egis has really invested in asset management over the last 20 years, because of their involvement in so many PPPs around the world, primarily to do with airports and road infrastructure. So it's really about making sure that everyone is aligned, our governance is in place, our data models in place, and that we use technology as much as we can. The data is fundamental to absolutely everything, but it's making sure that you understand what processes you want to have in place. You've got multiple different systems working in completely different ways, and integrating those is a challenge. And then, but to be able to rectify that comes from having your data governance in place, having your asset information models in place, by understanding different parts of the organization, how they're going to use that data, to then be able to understand how you're going to integrate that to have the outcomes that you want. So whether you're a finance person that wants to look at the numbers, whether you're an engineer that wants to look at the operational data, or whether you're a technician on the ground that really wants to understand what he's looking at, it's really important to have your governance and your data structures in a consistent way that whole organizations can look at that. And a really good example of sort of multiple companies coming together to do that now within the region is we've got GCC Rail coming on board. And what they're looking at doing is they're looking at developing a data management system that can integrate all the different countries, all the different rail operators, all the different networks to have a consistent way of managing all of their data from an asset management perspective in their governance. And that's fantastic to see, because then it's really taking into account everyone that's going to be involved from different countries and different companies to make sure that they are working in the same way. So breaking down those silos is a big challenge. Leadership buy-in is critical, obviously, but it's also leadership, not necessarily the one person at the top. It's the people below him, and it's the people all the way down. It's really around training. Change management is a huge part of it, regardless of which level of the organization that you're in, and just really driving that understanding. So initially, asset management was really misunderstood, and there wasn't as much leadership buy-in. We've now got leadership buy-in. We understand the importance and the value that it brings. Now it's just really around communicating it, making sure that people have the right skills, because we still see a lot of skills gaps within the market, and just really making that understanding across the organization of why it's important to work in a consistent way. I don't necessarily think convincing is required anymore when it comes to acquiring a digital asset management system. I think there is an understanding that of the value that it brings, provided that it's done correctly. And we're still often seeing that buying technology without really understanding what's required is still a challenge that we've had now for the last 20 years, regardless of the industry. And so it's really about making sure that you work alongside your clients to understand why they're looking for that technology, to make sure that they get the most value out of it. Within Egis, we've got the advisory, we've got the consultants where we can come in and we can create your strategy and your plans and make sure that you're aligned to international standards and best practices, create that benchmark, understand where we want to go from a gap analysis perspective, all that great strategy, typical consultancy stuff, right? We can do that. We've got the engineers, who are the really smart ones that really actually enable the how you're going to do it. Your consultants will say what and why. Your engineers will come in and say, okay, this is how you're going to do it, and then it's all around enablement through technology and using digital tools, using analytics, using different platforms. How can that all then come together to be enabled? And that's why the acquisition for Certus is really exciting for us, because it gives us a really comprehensive end-to-end service that we can go out and offer to our clients. With Certus, it now means that we're an IBM Platinum partner, which means we get to work very closely together with the IBM developers. We bring that industry knowledge and experience. They've obviously the tech drivers, and using AI to really extract information in a way that hasn't been done before. The biggest challenge with asset investment planning, as an example, and I'm going to focus on that because that's what most excites me about AI coming in, is you've got pools and pools and pools of data, but actually extracting anything out of that is really difficult. And that's where AI can really come in, because it will look at your data, but it then also has the outreach to go out and get information of that data. So if we put let's take a specific asset as an example, we can go, right, we've got all the historic data for this asset. Let's plug it in and let's look at that historic data and let's try and see some predictive elements, because I can then go out and look at get certain information that I don't have access to at the moment. So I've got this asset, I've had it for 10 years. This is the history that we have of it. It's been over-maintained, it's been under-maintained. We've spent X versus Y that we're supposed to spend. We've got another 15 years expected of this asset. Let's use AI to help us predict what we're going to need to do with it to be able to get that 15 years out of it. So it can go and look at industry standards, and it can say, well, your asset isn't going to last 25 years because it's sitting on the roof in 50 degree heat. So you might need to reduce this. And this is all based on industry standards and best practices. It's not AI going out and doing it. And then looking at different elements around the hours of operation, so what it was designed to do versus what it's actually doing, what the output is versus what the capacity of it is expected to be, and it will be able to do all of these calculations for us and do different scenarios. And that's one of the challenges that we've had with asset investment planning, is to being able to do scenarios. So instead of going, okay, I've got this asset for another 15 years, I can either do one, two, or three. What's the best outcome? And that's what we don't have at the moment, and that's what AI will come in and help us with and do it effectively. It can be done, but it's a time-consuming process at the moment. Why asset management is transversal within Aegis is because regardless of where you are within the life cycle of your project, whether it's in the planning stage, whether it's in the design stage, whether it's in the construction or the operations, asset management has touch points with each of those. If you look at all of the different REBA stages, from REBA 0 to 7 or 8, from the strategic planning and creating the asset brief, through the design phases, through the construction phases, to hand over and operate, there's asset management touch points and all of those. So our teams work with the consultants, and we obviously have our own consultants before it goes into concept design. We're seeing a big requirement at the moment to do life cycle costing and life cycle management during design phases, which feeds into the way that the BIM model will be developed and the asset information model through the different stages. So we have touch points with multiple different elements. We also do work with our clients, and my team delivers independent projects, but because we have such a large amount of O&M projects that are internal to Aegis, we do projects internally in that sense. So we've got a number of really big projects in Qatar. We're managing over 2,000 kilometers of highway. There's a huge asset management team within that project. We manage pretty much all of the bridges, tunnels, and overpasses in Dubai. We've got 1,800 people that look after that. There's a huge asset management element within there. So the reason that we say that it's transversal is because there's so many different parts of the organization and all of our different sectors and industries that we focus on, where asset management can sit across each and every one of those. By standardizing the way that we manage our data, the way that we use our technology, having the same platforms, it really gives us an industry standard to have an industry solution to really help with what we're doing. It's just learnings. It's sharing knowledge. We have steering groups between all of these different projects around the world, and we adapt as we go, and then we use technology to enable that. So I'll use our O&M contracts as an example. I'll focus on road specifically because that's the biggest part of our O&M operation. We do work in Ireland on roads and tunnels, the M25 in the UK. We've got work in Greece, we've got work in Turkey, we've got a lot of work in Australia, obviously are in Qatar and in the UAE. And what that does is it allows us, and now with the help of Certus coming on board, is to create a standard way of implementing technology that's aligned to international standards and best practices, so that we can use technology in the way that we deliver our services. We can use technology in the way that our asset managers are managing the life cycle of those assets, and it allows us to land and expand relatively quickly as new projects come on board. With roads in particular, they're a lot more complex than people actually think. There's a lot of systems in place. There's a lot of civil infrastructure around the roads to ensure the operation of those roads. There's obviously things like lighting and way stations and other different asset types. And then surfaces and the standards of surfaces is different because we operate in different parts of the world. Roads that we might see within the Middle East that are subject to sort of harsh environments versus roads in the UK and Europe, which are subject to more wet environments, have different requirements to maintain them, to ensure their life cycle is there. So it's really around understanding the regional requirements, the technologies that you use to monitor those roads. in the way that you do your surveys, and you're measuring for cracks, the width of those cracks, the depth of those cracks. You're monitoring for potholes, again, all around depth and size of those potholes, and the roughness of the road is also very important, because it's really around user experience and user comfort at the end of the day. So taking all of those different elements and applying them in different parts of the world is something that we look at, and that we can come in and that we can do. So the data points that we would particularly capture around the assets itself are fairly consistent and fairly standard, and then also the operational elements. Looking at introducing technology, there's a number of functional requirements that are obviously in place, and those will come from each individual projects, because there are some variances to contracts where certain things have to be managed in different ways. But being able to deploy the technology relatively quickly based on all of our learnings is something that we're mastering at the moment. AI is a thing, right? Let's be honest. It's here and it's now. It's not the be all and end all. It's not the only skill that you need, but there is really understanding the digital side of things. Being digitally aware and digitally fluent is going to be a really important part. Being able to look at it from a whole life cycle perspective, looking at it over 25 years and thinking a little bit more long term when it comes to risk, value, and performance. And then also, I think there's going to be a huge push to be commercially astute and aware. Again, being asset management, being a financially driven, a primarily financially driven industry, I think being commercially astute and understanding PPP models is also going to be a skill that we're going to need to see within the industry. In the next 5 years, and again, I'm going to mention AI, and the reason I'm excited about AI within asset management is one of the things that has really been a challenge, and it's getting there, is around asset investment planning. And to be able to deliver and achieve effective asset investment planning, you need to have the data is first and foremost, but there's a lot of analytical skills that need to be created. You need to have a lot of experience with technology, because AI will then come in and really help enable asset investment planning like we haven't seen before. And that's something that we're working on at the moment, to really develop that industry by industry, so that we can go and talk to our clients about it. Because as much as we have spoken about it in the past, we haven't really been able to get there. And I think that's where South Asia is going to really come in and be able to support that side of things, is to really go and develop it quickly and offer it to clients in an environment that still needs to go out and get their data governance sorted out and their integration sorted out. But I think once they see the results of what's possible with asset investment planning leveraged with AI, it's going to, I think that will then sort of accelerate the growth that we're expecting in South Asia. Similarly, for the Middle East, although in a different context, I think asset management in the Middle East is still going to be on that maturity curve, moving away from predictive maintenance, moving away from condition maintenance, which is still quite mature, trying to get to that asset performance management. And to really achieve asset performance management, you need to have your previous historic data. You need to have your current data to be able to do your predictive analytics. And I think that's where the region will move to from the Middle East, and that's what we're still very focused on. If AI can come in and support that, that's absolutely fantastic. And then I think in South Asia, I think AI will accelerate, because the opportunity will then drive the maturity.